Hello, everybody, and welcome to my keynote on governance in the age of AI. So honored to be kicking off day one of the Metadata AI Summit. My name is Shirshanka Das, and I've had quite an interesting journey getting to here. Prior to this, I was at LinkedIn for 10 plus years, where I spent more than a decade in data infrastructure. My responsibilities included data management, data democracy, data privacy. I was the GDPR lead for LinkedIn as well. And through these problems, I ended up founding the DataHub project to solve a bunch of these problems using a metadata driven solution. Fast forward to 2019, me and my team open sourced the DataHub project. We saw a lot of companies outside LinkedIn trying to adopt it, but it was honestly a little bit slow and hard for them. Meanwhile, DataHub at LinkedIn started getting used for problems like AI governance. And I realized that I really needed to fulfill its destiny as driving metadata management beyond just LinkedIn. So in 2021, founded Acryl Data. We were backed by LinkedIn as well as 8VC and a bunch of other investors. And we got to work. A lot of the work we did initially was making sure that DataHub could be adopted by a ton of enterprises outside LinkedIn. Added GraphQL engines, built a whole new ingestion framework, added a lot of capabilities to the platform, including support for like no-code metadata modeling. We, in fact, even rewrote the UI from scratch. We're actually on our second rewrite right now. And more than anything, we grew and nurtured the DataHub community. And that was back in 2021. And we've come a long way. And I'm so excited today to be sharing what we're doing with the project and how that relates to governance in the age of AI. So I'm Shirshanka Das, CTO and co-founder at Acryl Data and founder of the DataHub project. What is the DataHub project, you might be asking? If you're not familiar, DataHub is an open source metadata platform, and it really drives three distinct outcomes: discovery, the ability to find things; observability, the ability to understand how things are changing and whether they are actually to be trusted or not; and finally, governance, which is kind of a broader umbrella that covers data management as well as compliance and other categories. And we do this on top of a high fidelity metadata graph, which is built on top of information like all the people who are working on all the data and all the code that backs all of this. So we'll get into more details later. But DataHub is really the number one open source project in the space, and Acryl Data is the company that's behind it. The reason DataHub is so popular is, many fold. Firstly, we have integrations with pretty much every single technology known to mankind. We started with, the old school pieces, and then we moved on to the modern data stack, and now we're working on even more advanced connections to every single tool that gets invented. We have a big open source community, and that ends up contributing a lot of these connectors, and we end up maturing them over time as well. So that's kind of one of the big reasons. And the other big reason is the amazing adopters and contributors we have to the project. We have teams from Apple and BlackRock and Netflix and Visa and Optum and these amazing technology forward companies that are not only adopting this project, but also contributing back to it. And that makes sure that this project continues to advance by leaps and bounds. GitHub agrees, compared to a lot of the other technologies in the space, DataHub is the most mature and continues to have the largest amount of growth over time. We also have a really large community of data practitioners. As you all know, metadata is a complex problem, and it truly takes a village to get things going and to continue to build at the cutting edge of innovation. Our Slack community has more than 12,000 people, and if you haven't joined it already, please do. It's a very welcoming place, and you'll get to talk and geek out about all things governance and AI and metadata. But this talk is about governance in the age of AI. So let's spend a little bit of time looking at the AI landscape. You're probably not going to be surprised to hear that we are in the midst of a huge shift. In fact, just a year ago, when I was talking about the future of metadata, I was talking about metadata as an enabler for a vision to build a control plane for data. And here I am talking about governance in the age of AI. That's how quickly the industry has changed. And a lot of it has been really shaped by generative AI, obviously. But that doesn't mean predictive AI or classical ML is not important. Um, I don't know how much stock you put into analyst predictions, but Gartner, which is pretty respected, says that 50% of enterprises are expected to operationalize AI by the end of 2025. That's literally next year. We think that a lot of the reason we've had this extreme shift from just talking about AI or just building teams that require extremely specialized skill sets of AI engineers to build these applications to now, when every company is thinking like, we can do AI tomorrow, next week, is that a lot of the accessibility of AI technology has really been slashed. Today, you can just connect up to an API or download an open source model and build an AI application and demonstrate it over the next week very easily. Meanwhile, at the top level, at board meetings, all around the world, the only question that CEOs and founders are being asked is, so are you AI driven? When are you launching your next AI application? And so organizations are now being forced to be AI powered or else lose to competition and be declared a dinosaur. And so these two trends are really driving this huge shift in top down decision making as well as bottom up excitement around building AI and then shipping it to production. However, this trend has a few folks worried. If you're in the audience and you're a governance persona, you know who you are. Uh, Same industry analyst Gartner says, legal, compliance, and privacy leaders actually rank this trend as their biggest worry, their top issue for the next 2 years. And the reason for that is that with rampant adoption of AI without good guardrails, you could have a lot of problems. So if you think about governance, and it's a big word and it means a lot of things to a lot of people, we like to simplify it down. I like to say good governance is really three things: discovery, meaning finding the right foundations to build your next model, your next feature, your next metric; reliability, ensuring that your data and AI assets are actually not just good on the day they were built, but that they continue to maintain their quality; and then finally, compliance. Obviously, we have a lot of rules and regulations coming down the pipe, making sure that both data and AI is being used in compliant ways. Of course, governance is a broad term and it encompasses a lot of things. But when you finally boil it down to the essentials, I think these are the three pillars around which you should be thinking about your governance strategy. Are you enabling good discovery of the right assets? Are you able to maintain quality and reliability of the things that you're building? And finally, are you able to ensure that you're complying with all your rules and regulations that you're supposed to comply by? So that then means we need to think about our solutions also along those dimensions. But this is actually the reality in most companies. I mean, this is a fictional company where there's an adoptions team that builds models. There's an e-commerce and data science team that is continuously making changes to the code. There's actually a governance team that's always worried whether the AI models that they're shipping was trained on PII data or not. And the data supply chain is obviously multifaceted and multi-stage. You've got production systems that are storing all of your operational data. You then have ingestion and transformation systems that transform it. Then you have lake/warehouse systems, sometimes both, that are actually used for large-scale transformations. And then you have data that goes out into either BI systems for internal decision making, or now more recently, AI systems that are actually shipping these models back into production. And so closing the loop from data getting produced to getting consumed. And this complex journey that data takes means that all of these constituents that live on top of this complex data landscape are having to make decisions without actually having a full picture of what's going on. So what does this lead to? First of all, the supply chain is so complex, no one really knows what's going on. And so you end up asking everyone. If an adoptions team member wants to figure out if their model is misbehaving or their data is bad, they're essentially going to ask everyone that they know in their neighborhood. And then they're going to ask everyone they know. And very soon, you just end up having too many conversations and you're still not able to figure out what the root cause is. And in the end, most of these teams end up making locally optimal decisions. So team A might decide, well, let's just build a model monitoring solution. And team B might say, well, let's just go buy some sort of compliance tool. And now these tools don't talk to each other. And so you end up having locally optimal decisions lead to even more chaos because individual teams are making decisions based on tools that are not actually even talking to each other. And so that's the reality we live in. And we really want to get away from this. You might be wondering, why is it so hard? Why can't people talk to each other and just figure it out? The reality is, governance has always been hard. And so this is not new. If you've ever tried to run a governance initiative, you know how hard it is. Most people would walk up to teams and ask them to document their data better and get laughed out of the room. Or they would put in place a very large and complex tool to solve for compliance and governance. And that tool would just gather dust because no one uses it, except for one team that maybe is off to the side, busily documenting data that just arrives, 1 year later. Like the documentation arrives 1 year later and the data is already not being used anymore. And the reason all of these pathologies exist in governance is because in the end, good governance requires some form of human context. And that human context is actually locked up in the heads of the teams that produce data. If you're a team that is building a model, you know exactly what data you're putting into the model. So if a different team goes in and tries to document your model after the fact, they're going to get it wrong. And if governance activities are not really aligned with how you are creating and producing data or producing AI assets, you're never going to do it. And it's going to get done later and it's going to be wrong. This leads to what I'm calling, usually the death spiral of governance in enterprises. You'll typically launch a governance initiative with a lot of fanfare. Perhaps you'll even have some top-down buy-in. The initiative kicks off. The teams that are supposed to do the work, of course, aren't involved and they don't give you time of day. You assemble a small team that tries to document everything that they can, but they get it wrong. And after some time, someone takes a look at it and says, I don't think I can trust this. And very soon, your initiative gets underfunded, and over time, it just peters away. So that's been the reason why governance, even for data, has been a hard problem and a hard nut for us to solve. And now we've got a new problem with generative AI saying governance is even more important, even more essential. So how do we do this? First of all, we've barely got our arms around data governance. And now we've got generative AI coming in. Is this like a bigger problem? Well, I think it's actually a huge opportunity because generative AI provides governance with some interesting opportunities that it can take advantage of to actually get to success. Let's go back to the problems of governance. Governance is usually chronically underfunded. Real context is only known to people doing the day-to-day work, and it usually requires a lot of manual labor from end users. That actually directly translates to opportunities for AI. Because if you can align your governance initiatives to help AI hit production sooner, you'll actually get the funding you need from your executive team, and you'll be able to prove that you can hit AI in production sooner with higher safety and reliability guarantees, which is actually one of the top worries, one of the top reasons why AI proponents are worried about AI hitting production anytime soon. And the second big opportunity is that GenAI itself can actually automate 90% of governance activities, whether it's describing things or finding things. And that means a lot of the problems that we have with governance, underfunding, and then a lot of human participation can actually get tackled by attaching, uh, using generative AI to power governance and by attaching governance initiatives to generative AI outcomes. So, how do we do that? The rest of the talk is split into two parts. First, how AI can help governance, and second, how governance can help AI. So let's tackle the first part, how AI can help governance. One of my learnings from running GDPR at LinkedIn was that you can't be too bullish about AI. I remember, we had one of the best data science and ML teams, and we had a large Hadoop warehouse that we needed to scan and classify. And we said, well, let's have machine learning engineers go at it and have them classify all of the data that's in the lake. And we did that. And the results were sometimes right, but a lot of times very wrong. And so we realized that we actually need humans in the loop to verify some of the output that these AI models were producing, and especially if it's a high stakes outcome like compliance. And not only that, that human, it can't just be any human. Like I said before, it has to be the right human. The person who actually produced the data or knows what's in the data is the right human to actually validate that the AI model is producing the right suggestion or the right proposal. And that's what we believe needs to be done to have AI drive governance initiatives. So the playbook that we want to follow is essentially a three-part story. Step one, AI suggests classification, documentation, tags, all other kind of governance primitives that you might have. Then you involve the right human. This is usually either the person or the team that produces the data or is responsible for the safekeeping and the maintenance of the data. And then finally, once they approve or correct, you enable automated systems to monitor and enforce these kind of governance primitives. So for example, you can have an AI model detect that a particular PDF or a particular row in a column has email addresses. You can have a human actually verify that and make sure it's actually a PII style email address and not just an email address of a vendor. And then finally, you can have automated data cleaning, data scrubbing, machinery kickoff that actually enable automated retention or automated scrubbing. That kind of completes the loop for AI driving governance initiatives. You involved humans in a minimal way, but you made sure that you had the right sign-off from the right people. In terms of how we are thinking about the areas of focus for AI driving governance initiatives as part of the DataHub project, we're really looking at it in terms of three big pillars. First, documentation, being able to produce high quality, trusted, human readable documentation for assets. Second, classification, being able to predict sensitivity levels of specific columns, features, etc. And finally, quality, being able to determine even what data quality controls should be used based on observed trends. And I'll go through a quick walkthrough of the progress there so far and what we're planning. First off, and this is freshly off the press in DataHub Cloud version 3.6, documentation generation. This is something that we've been working on for almost 8 months to a year now. And we've gotten pretty far along from the early days where we were generating extremely machine-generated style documentation to a lot more human-readable documentation. We've layered in, content insights, source insights, use cases, practitioner-oriented tips for how you can use this data set, compliance insights, as well as summarize usage, insights, and purpose. And obviously, a lot of the challenge here is in preventing hallucination, making sure that the data is actually useful and also correct and also recent. So this is how far we've come along in terms of being able to generate documentation, and the future looks really promising here. Next up, classification. or tags, and as we call it in the DataHub terminology, business glossary terms. Usually, companies will organize their business glossary using either classification labels or even business terms. You can essentially import your taxonomy and ask DataHub Cloud to suggest uh, for even columns as well as tables what classification terms or business glossary terms should be applied. You can limit it to specific assets that you care about, and you can also ensure that there's a human in the loop. Once the machinery starts running, it starts proposing, and those proposals show up in the data owner's inbox. And they basically get to see, well, DataHub AI requests to add this particular column. You can get to see if that's correct or not, approve or decline. And those feedback loops also help AI get better, obviously. For someone who's purely in a discovery mode, they come into the data profile page, the data entity page. At the table level, they can see all of the glossary terms, both confirmed as well as proposed. So that gives them a sense of all the different columns, all of the documentation associated with them, as well as the sensitivity labels. So that completes kind of where we're going with classification, and we intend to get better at predicting as well as suggesting those tags. Quality is also a very interesting area of our focus. DataHub supports essentially reporting both definitions of tests as well as evaluations of tests. But at the same time, DataHub Cloud also predicts new tests so that you don't have to determine what checks you want to run or what checks should even exist. AI can actually observe all of the things that are going on with your table and start predicting what tests you should be writing, which is pretty cool because who wants to write tests by hand, right? So we can detect freshness assertions, we can detect uniqueness assertions and various kinds of column level as well as table level quality checks that we can detect and then start proposing. And in some cases, we can start auto monitoring them as well. In terms of what this all leads to is really not just search, but conversational interfaces for all of your metadata. Imagine you've got your entire metadata graph with tables and columns and AI models, and you can just start asking questions as a data consumer of all of this metadata. Which data set should I use for predictions? Maybe add the confidential tag to all of these assets. Or as a data governance persona, you might start asking a question like, hey, suggest a governance policy that ensures that all assets in Snowflake have their compliance terms filled out, or ensure that all models that have been built are only built from anonymized data. Or even more exciting, here's a PDF of all our compliance guidelines that I'm supposed to follow. Can you please suggest what policies I should be creating and start monitoring them automatically? That's the conversational future that we are going towards. And this is ground zero of that journey. That completes my tour of how I think AI can help governance. And as promised, I want to next talk about how governance can help AI. So AI governance is actually almost the same as data governance, but it actually brings a lot of new needs. Let's take a quick tour of DataHub's own metadata graph. And this has been driven so far mostly by data governance needs. We started with the venerable data set. Everyone knows and loves a data set. Data sets come in different forms and shapes. Some are tables, some are streams, some are folders. And those things have other things associated with them, like columns and schemas and glossaries and tags. And then there are dashboards and pipelines and data processes. And then there are users and groups. And then there are roles and domains and data products and data contracts. And all of these concepts over time have been added on to the DataHub metadata model as we have evolved to handle data governance and discovery needs. And there's a few entities in there that you might recognize that are AI entities, like an ML model and a feature. And those are, the early indication of the fact that data governance is not just limited to data, it also needs to include AI concepts. But ML models and features are just the tip of the iceberg when it comes to what AI needs for governance. You need to track experiments. Unlike traditional data pipelines, AI workflows involve extensive experimentation. Data scientists are running numerous iterations with different hyperparameters, model architectures, and tracking these experiments, their results, and the conditions under which they were run is crucial for both reproducibility as well as improvement. Model versioning and lineage is super important as well. You need to not only understand every single version of your model that has been in production, you also need to know what data this was trained on, and then be able to audit how that model has performed over time. Feature stores, feature engineering is getting less popular now with the advent of generative AI. A lot of the energy is going towards prompt-based engineering. And so prompt templates and their versions, and being able to have embeddings and their versions, being able to track usage of prompts across applications, performance metrics of all of these different prompts. These are all becoming important things to understand how an AI application is performing, and also to understand what kind of data and what kind of models an AI application is using. And there's many more. In fact, there's so many more that I even wrote a blog about it. And you can scan this QR code to find out and read the whole blog. I'm not going to go into it in a ton of detail here, but there's a lot of other things that AI brings to the table. Multimodality, ethical concerns, being able to do AI-specific data quality, and being able to understand the AI-human interaction and being able to log and observe it as well. These are all new needs that AI governance and the AI landscape really brings in to the governance equation. And so as you might think, this actually brings in a lot of new challenges for metadata infrastructure. So for a system like DataHub, that's supposed to be a metadata platform, that's supposed to be extensible, it actually brings in a host of new challenges. And we think of it in three big buckets. The first is variety. As I explained, AI requires a host of new things to be represented, collected, indexed, and then queried. And then these things actually need to be versioned. And this is somewhat new. I mean, as software engineers, we all love versioning. But when it comes to classical warehousey data, you don't really deal with versioning at that level. Sure, during the Hadoop era, we talked about partitions for a bit. But nowadays, with the advent of cloud warehouses, you're mostly thinking, I've got a table, I write data to it, and that's as simple as it gets. But with AI, you've got new models that are getting built. They have versions, and they need to actually track what version of data they used to construct themselves. And so AI governance actually requires extreme versioning, and that brings in new challenges for metadata infrastructure. Velocity is a new thing as well. While data does have velocity and data change does create some velocity, but AI models in production are actually producing a constant stream of metadata. If you want to get down to understanding why a specific decision was made by a model when recommending a particular job to you, well, that's something that's a constant stream of data at that point. So DataHub, as you might imagine, is actually evolving to address all of these new challenges. The first thing we're doing is building an AI asset registry. What does that mean? It means extending the metadata model, which today is focused on data and adjacent assets, including some AI assets, really expanding it to include models, features, which we already do, but also adding prompts and functions and embeddings and really good support for unstructured data as well. These are some mocks for what that might look like in the product, but we're working on extending it over the next few months to add all of these capabilities. The next thing that we're adding support for is versions for everything. So DataHub already supports kind of a more physical versioning capability, but we're extending it to support logical versions so that you can register externally versioned artifacts to DataHub and actually link them with other versioned artifacts. So I can say that this table at version 1.2 is a version of a logical table, T, and a model M has a version 3.2 that was trained on this particular version 5 days ago. So being able to represent the world in this level of detail is something we are going towards. And that, as you might imagine, allows us to answer some of these hard questions. And it finally allows us to build version lineage graphs. So I can actually see which version of a model was trained on which version of a data set. And that's not all. We're also adding support with our event-oriented nature for really extreme monitoring capabilities. Compliance monitoring is an example of a use case that is extremely important to solve. And that requires reporting information from each individual data processor about what they did and when they did it and to whom. So, for example, if you go up to a data provider and you ask them to delete your data from their systems, internally, those applications have multiple data processors that all need to go in and clean data. Maybe some of them are cleaning it from the operational systems. Some processors are cleaning it from the analytical systems, and other processors are cleaning it from the AI systems. All of those cleaning agents have to then report what they did to a central place so that you can then finally say, yep, I can prove with guarantees that this cleaning did indeed happen. And so DataHub is actually going to build an open specification for how data definitions and data deletions and data management operations are executed so that you can centralize all of that compliance monitoring and reporting scenarios. Again, that's something we want to build together with the community. And so the future, as we see it, is remember all of those people who were so confused because their AI stack and their production stack and their transformation stack was decoupled and not really talking to each other? They're going to have a much better time. The adoption team that's trying to figure out if their model is misbehaving or their data is bad, they can just log on to DataHub and ask that question, and they'll be able to see a 360-degree view of all their data assets, their lineage, as well as their AI models, so they can understand if it's the model that's misbehaving or if it's the data that's bad. If a production engineer wants to deprecate a column, they can actually understand which models depend on it and whether it's safe to do it or not. And most importantly, the governance team, who's always nervous whether a particular model that's being served on the site is violating some sort of promise they made to their members, are able to actually write policies that are encapsulated as code and are able to actually monitor it continuously, not just at a point in time. And they can do this across their entire data estate, not just one system at a time. And they can do that if DataHub can sit across all of these individual systems, if it can observe all of the things that's going on within it, and then it can react and monitor it. And that's the future we're going towards. Unified governance for data and AI, a consistent source of truth for all of these individuals, and being able to serve multiple stakeholders. And that brings me to the end of my talk. If you've been paying attention, you probably don't need this slide. But if you haven't, here are the key takeaways. The AI wave is real. It's powered by generative AI. AI is bringing new challenges and opportunities for governance. So don't be scared. It's actually a friend, but you have to harness it in the right way. A unified metadata platform holds the key to bringing order to this chaos. If you try to solve this problem by solving it in a point-to-point way, solving it in a siloed way, the likelihood of success is low. But if you can bring all this metadata together, and if you can look at it as one single graph, then you can actually solve these problems in a much more clean way and in a much more future-proof way. We are, of course, building towards this vision in the open through the open source DataHub project. We have a stellar group of partners, 12,000 plus data practitioners, and a crazy group of technology forward companies like Apple, Netflix, Optum, Visa, and many others. And so this is your invitation. Come join us, join the movement. We are at datahubproject.io. We also have a Slack space that you can join. But more importantly, get on the metadata train and let's make governance happen in the age of AI.